couples that don't argue a thing. And so this is something that Kenny and I get all the time.
Yep.
It's like even my dad in his masterful speech at our wedding.
Yeah, you
was
did say
like,
that.
I've never even heard them argue. I don't even know if they've argued. And then he goes, I'm sure they've argued before, but if they have, I've never heard about it. It is like, yeah, we haven't had an explosive argument, that's for sure.
And I would even call like,
No, I don't think
we don't argue.
Yeah, we don't argue.
They're like
at all.
discussions,
Right.
but it's not like an argument.
Mm-hmm.
Like arguments I've seen people have.
Yeah, absolutely. There are always discussions that help us to grow and that push us forward and where we're going as a couple, right? And it's because we are aligned and we both understand the mission and we both understand what we've signed up for. And so even if we're, upset or disappointed in something that's going on, we can still come to each other and we can still talk it out to come to an understanding to help push us forward so that, we can, grow from the situation and learn from it rather than just arguing and causing more dissension and more division.
It just sounds exhausting.
Yeah, it does sound exhausting. But anyway, let's get to Candace talks about this with her husband, George. And so we are going to discuss that now.
I'm kind of thinking out loud most of the time. I'm going, okay, this is a new topic. I'm not sure what I think about it. And that must have an impact on your life because people just assume that we agree on everything and we don't agree on everything. So what are
Yeah, of course we don't.
Of course we don't. Yeah. And I think that's something people are very interested in is how do we navigate that? Because I don't really think we think about how to navigate that, but it is a big thing that my positions kind of become the family position on things because people just assume that this must be what you think.
So that's interesting that when you're in a relationship with somebody or when you're even best friends with somebody or close with somebody, they think that everything that you say is what I would agree with or is the same ideology that I would have, right? The same, ideas that I would propagate as well, which isn't always the case, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, yes, core values and, where our life is headed is certainly in alignment, but that doesn't mean every little thing that has to do with life we're going to agree with. And that's okay, all right? Because we do love each other and we are on the same mission, but that doesn't mean we're the same person.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer to that when people have confronted me about this personally is always like, well, do you agree with everything your wife says? Or do you agree with everything your husband says? I mean, it would be weird if everyone thought with a hive mind because it would just become the de facto, like, that's weird. That implies that you share an absolute belief in everything, right? Which is very odd.
Yeah, an absolute belief in everything, which is ironically what these political entities want you to do, left and right, the extreme left and the extreme right. They want you to be one-track minded, right, and be a monolith and have this one belief in everything, their supreme belief, right? And so, but even within Christianity, it's like we have principles and we have commandments, right? But those can be expressed and obeyed in different ways because we all have different personalities. We're all different people. And so even in the Bible, it's talking about, we're all one body, but the body has different functions and people serve in different ways. People have different gifts and this, that, and the third. And so we aren't just, all thinking the same, all just zombified and just like, I'm thinking of that, you might not even know this, but it's like the Jimmy Neutron movie when like the aliens are just all like marching and
Yeah, I know what you're
they zombified all the humans
Yeah.
and they can't snap out of it. It's like that's what they want you to turn into, but that's not how you should operate, especially if you're free as a person, like a free thinker. I hate that term, but essentially that, or you're free in Christ.
Yeah, my imagery of it is like Toontown. You know that game?
Yeah, I remember Toontown.
Yeah, there's like the robot city, and then there's also like just they're free living, colorful, all that kind of stuff, versus the robot city where it's like just really boxy, gray, dreary, lots of mean robots, all that kind of stuff. So that's my imagery of that too.
Yeah, super interesting. Super interesting. So yeah, let's get back into it.
And I've never met anyone who has had that. So I think that what we agree on, because the individual topics themselves are highly nuanced and quite difficult to always reach conclusions on, but I think what we agree on is the process. And I think that that actually is more important than almost the end result. Because the process that you and I have is one of a dialectic, and it's one of a discussion, a process where we challenge each other on what we perceive to be, well, there is truth. We know that there is truth. We know that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that is truth, and he is a transcendental. Truth is a transcendental. But the point being is that beyond that truth, how does that truth reflect itself in the world that we live in? That then becomes the process, the hermeneutic, if you want to call it that, through which we then try and establish other truth.
So yes, so he's basically saying like, hey, look, there is this idea, there's this point that we're trying to get to, right? And we might not agree on the exact path, right? The direction that we can get there the most efficiently, right?
Yeah.
It's like your GPS, you got Waves and I got just Apple Maps, and it's telling us two different directions, and we're like, no, this way is faster. And I'm like, no, this way is faster. Right? We don't agree on
Which app to use.
but we
get to
do
the same.
agree that we're going to the same place.
Yeah.
Right? And because we agree on that, now we can go through the process of like, all right, let's discuss this on what is the most effective way. Let's whittle this down. Let's talk about it. And let's just, think critically to sharpen both of us individually and as a couple.
Yeah, I think like even politically, going back to that conversation, I think a lot of times like there's a goal that both sides want to fix or reach, but then they go about it a completely different way. Whereas where I think it would be helpful to just like genuinely have a conversation and just like talk it out and have a discussion about it rather than arguing and fighting, I'm sure there'd be a better way to get to that point.
Absolutely. I don't know what just happened. All right, well, that's over with. So yeah, basically, are they lying? Right? Because a lot of people will see this and say, well, they're obviously argue all the time. Like I argue with my boyfriend, I argue with my girlfriend, but I love her. Like it's just a part of it. I think it's actually good to argue in a relationship. You often
I hear that all the time.
Right? And it's like, I mean, if you got two like really rambunctious people, I think sometimes maybe that's inevitable, right? But for the most part, you shouldn't be just arguing or expecting that an argument is a sign of healthiness.
Or wanting an argument.
Right.
I feel like that's toxic.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely toxic. And so I don't think they're lying. I think this is their dynamic, and
I agree.
that's just how they chill. I'm sure Candace sometimes is a lot.
Yeah, that's what they talk about in the
And he's just probably just like, chill out, woman. And she's like, okay.
Yeah,
And
they
so-
talk about how like the dynamics between like American culture and English culture.
Right. And that's something that's super important too, understanding like the backgrounds of where your person comes from, right? Is like, because they may not have grown up in the same situation or in the same environment that you did. Says even from suburb to suburb, it could be different if they're growing up in different parts of the country, right? Because growing up in the suburb of, the Southeast is very different than the Northeast, right? But they could have grown up, middle class in the same socioeconomic status, but have completely different outlooks on the way they view things or even how they live their life because they're in a different setting, a different culture. So,
yeah, I'm kind of thinking.
So we got arguments here.
Yeah, so like something they touched on was, of course, do they agree on everything? And George mentioned the hive mindset, and like we touched on that a little bit, but I think having a hive mindset prevents growth. And like I was talking about with the Toontown and like the one side of the town where it's gray and just dreary and all that kind of stuff is because everyone's thinking the same. Everyone's like focused on this one thing, and there's no creativity. There's no
individualism.
Individualism, all that kind of stuff. And I think the same for a relationship. Like, can you really have a relationship if if both people are just thinking exactly the same and have this, like, how can conversations come up? Like, you just be like, I like gray shoes, and you're like, I like gray shoes too.
Yeah, there's no contrast.
There's just nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing to add or make it flourish.
Yeah, there's no contrast. Like some of our conversations is because, or best conversations is like, I like this, and you're like, really? Why do you like that? Or vice versa, right? Like, tell me why. I want to know how your mind works in that way or in that area. Like, oh, you really like that? Like, yeah, what's wrong with you? I mean, but it's fun because like you love the person, and not only are you getting to know them better and deeper, but then it may bring out something in you that you weren't expecting. Like, oh, maybe that's not so bad, or maybe I do like that, or it just further affirms what you were thinking already.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, that's terrible. So yeah, can't agree on everything. I would agree that would be super, super boring.
And then the last one, like uncomfortable conversations, like, I guess that goes back to what we were talking about. Like, if you bring up something that I'm like, help me understand that. Because a lot of times I think people will try to avoid the uncomfortable conversation that extreme, or they will just be like, oh, you're totally wrong. Like, what's wrong with you? You're crazy. When I think just being able to have an uncomfortable conversation really helps to grow our mindsets and grow as people and grow in relationships and things like that. And then another point that they mentioned was how to avoid arguments. I feel like that's something that we can talk about as well and add value there. Going back to the uncomfortable conversations, being able to have open dialogue without interruptions and dismissiveness, and going back to your example of just asking questions and having curiosity and interest about the person that you're with. And they also mentioned that at church on Sunday about having interest in God and having a relationship with Him. In order to have a relationship with Him, you have to have an interest. And just like having a relationship with God, you have to have an interest with the people that you're surrounded by, like your family and your friends, your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, and just like asking them questions and getting to know their mindset and why they think about things. And I think a big point is the last one, which is agreeing to disagree. Like, okay, yeah, you have the conversation. You might get to the point where you're like, okay, yeah, I just completely don't agree with them, and that's okay. I feel like a lot of times people are like, no, we have to figure this out right now. When really it's like, okay, is it really that big of a deal? Like, can we just agree to disagree and move on?
Yeah, we can move on in this. Yeah, so understanding the nuance of the conversation, having some feel, as we would say, is crucial. But also just understanding who the person that you're in a relationship with, whether it's your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, or just a friend or family member, understanding, how they operate so that you can go about the situation in the best manner. Like, sometimes you do need to address it right then, or it may not get addressed at all. But sometimes that person just needs to cool down. It's like, okay, let's just move on. We can talk about it later, because you'll be in a much better headspace to talk about it, and we can communicate more effectively. So understanding like who you're dealing with, I think, is paramount. But, also having that curiosity and that interest in that person and wanting the best for them and wanting the best for the relationship, I think is the most important thing. Like I said, we've been stressing like being on the same mission, being on the same team. Like that just works in all facets of life, right? In any sort of dynamic where it's, well, any dynamic really, where it's like multiple people in a relationship, because then you have focus, and even when adversity hits, you understand that it's not the end of the world. You're able to overcome any obstacle because you're like, okay, they have my back. We're on the same team. All right, let's pick up the pieces. Let's move on. So yeah, I agree. So let's get to our quality sip, our last one for the night. And that is respect and love. Heading towards a destination has to be the foundation of every relationship for it to thrive. And so that just echoes exactly what I was just saying just a second ago. It's like you gotta have respect, and you gotta have a love for that person. You gotta be interested in them, and you gotta kind of understand what you're working with. And you also have to be you gotta have the same goal in mind, that you want the relationship to work. And that's gotta be foundational, right? That can't be something that's, caked on top of a faulty foundation. The foundation can't be, oh, but she looks good. Oh, I like him, right? The foundation,
okay, and
that's got to be the foundation, is that respect and that love headed towards where you want the relationship to go, right? For us, it's like, well, eternity in marriage. It's like, yeah, we're both in agreement with that. We both know that that's where we're headed. And so everything stems off that, even when we're maybe disappointed in the other one's actions, or, whatever other situation that could arise. It always comes back to that we love each other, we have respect, and that we're headed for an eternal marriage.